Thank you everyone for joining the virtual venture cafe today. Welcome our first time community members. Welcome to the family. We gather here every Thursday. So whenever you're free, feel free to join us. Before I hand the session over to Danielle, please remember to ask any questions you have in the chat. Feel free to send them directly to Danielle if you would like to keep your identity private, or feel free to post them in the general chat for everyone to see. And with this, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Danielle Duplin, who is the co-founder and global launch director of Agency. It is a worldwide innovation community for living longer and aging better. Agency combines co-working for aging-focused startups and enterprises at global CIC hubs with expert programming and an international community of innovators. And with this, Danielle, I am handing this over to you.
Thank you, Yulia, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in this very special edition of Ask Me Anything. This is an event co-produced by Agency, Worldwide Innovation for Living Longer and Aging Better, with our friends at Venture Cafe Cambridge. But we are here to connect with the world and to have a very important conversation, a very strategic conversation with one of the world's largest consumer product brand companies. Worldwide, global beloved brands that we find in our medicine cabinets, in our homes, in a way that is a very trusted relationship with these brands. These brands we use on our skin, we bathe our children, we take care of our very personal and intimate personal hygiene. And so we are very excited to have a conversation with Procter & Gamble, the innovation leader at Procter & Gamble, to talk about what's next on the horizon for these brands, particularly as it relates to the world's aging populations. We have all grown up with P&G brands. That's been trusted for over 180 years. What does it mean now to grow old with P&G, and do so in a way that brings beauty, grace, comfort, delight, and joy to our journey? So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest today, Chetan Parekh, innovation leader and head of the Procter & Gamble Ventures Studio. So Chetan, welcome to our community.
Thanks, Danielle. Super excited to be here and looking forward to an amazing conversation.
Indeed. So for everybody who's listening, please, we'd love to take your questions along the way. So feel free to enter them into the chat. Chetan and I will go through a little bit of the journey, like what is Procter & Gamble's Venture Studio? How are they looking at the growing demand for the world's aging population for more exciting products, and how you as innovators play a very crucial role in that journey. So let's get started. So Chetan, talk to us about Procter & Gamble as a company, 180 years as a trusted portfolio of brands. What is your future? What are you thinking about? Why are we even having this conversation?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So hi, everyone. Again, my name is Chetan Parekh. And if you think about Procter & Gamble, as Danielle said, we have some amazing brands that have been around for decades. And one of the things that the company has always prided itself on is innovation, right? Innovation is in our lifeblood, is what we say internally. And all of our categories, existing categories that we have really robust innovation that they have delivered over the years that has sustained the company over the many, many decades that it has. And the challenge that we were tasked with, specifically from a ventures organization perspective, is how do you start thinking about consumption as it would show up 5 or 10 years from now? And how do you position the company to succeed in that environment? And therefore, our charter was really start looking at interesting businesses that's where the consumption is going to come from, to really position the company to succeed 5 to 10 years from now. So what are the new categories that P&G should be thinking about getting into? And how do we partner with entrepreneurs to bring uniquely what we bring to the table, to then partner with the external ecosystem to create this win-win situation where we tap into their knowledge, bring our knowledge to the table, to start looking at some exciting possibilities. And the reason why, again, P&G Ventures is a small organization within the bigger Procter & Gamble company. And, we are looking for entrepreneurs with great ideas, as I said earlier. And that's where this entire journey has begun, to say, what are these new categories? What are some of the exciting possibilities that we as P&G should be looking today in order to position ourselves to succeed a decade down the road?
I love it. And we'll dig into some of those particular categories in a moment. I think it's helpful for the community innovators who are joining us today to understand a little bit more about how does P&G Venture Studio fit into the broader organization. So, you have a couple hundred brands that you represent. How does P&G Venture Studio kind of harness all of the wealth of resources that P&G brings to the table as it relates to like moving innovation along?
Yeah, and I think that's well put, because the moment somebody hears about the fact that P&G is interested in partnering with startups, the one word that comes to everybody's mind is access, right? Access to all of the retailers and distribution that obviously we have. That's really strong, and obviously that access is critical and important. And the way in which we have tried to position ourselves is, yes, that's important. And at the same time, we can give startups access to capabilities and resources and expertise that take the seed of an idea that you have, the seed of a technology that you have, and figure out what complementary expertise can we bring to the table. Maybe it's on branding, maybe it's R&D, maybe it's manufacturing, maybe it's legal and or regulatory. So it's really, from that particular perspective, a very synergistic and a slightly different model from your classic venture capital perspective, where it is more about capital and obviously connecting you with the right resources and mentoring. Here we actually bring ourselves into the picture to figure out, again, what are those complementary needs that you have that will accelerate your path to market, to then be able to convert the technology that you have into an actual consumer-facing product or a proposition that, again, brings the decades of experience that we have to the table, along with the expertise that comes with it. So what that also does, though, is it turns every relationship that we have with interesting startups into a different proposition. Because every technology, every startup that we interact with is necessarily at a different stage. Just from their life cycle perspective, different stage from what their needs are at any given point in time. And the agreements that we get into, the collaboration that we get into, the partnerships that we get into are completely tailored to each individual circumstance. So that then again creates a very unique studio type of an idea, where I'm not just giving you capital, but I'm actually figuring out how can I bring value to what you already have, and jointly, how can we grow this thing faster? And then truly operate from that partnership mindset perspective.
Well, and I love that eye towards commercialization. That's exactly what agency does with, that's one of our 4 core pillars. That we have the co-working space so companies can work together. So clearly, I love hearing that when startups are working with P&G Venture Studio, we'll have access to some of your kind of world-leading scientists or world-leading product manufacturers, or understand packaging, right? Some of the details that maybe if you're a startup with a great idea to solve a particular consumer need, you may not necessarily have that kind of expertise to get that product to market. So I love that you broker those connections within the larger organization. And indeed, it's all about commercializing. How do you get these products into the hands of millions of customers who could benefit from them, and create a sustainable business around that? So then help us understand, it sounds like you are interested in working with startups even at early idea stage, all the way through to, to ready to hit the market.
Completely agnostic to this stage. Again, what we do is, we cannot obviously have, we need to have some kind of framework. And the framework that we started off with in P&G Ventures is around the idea of macro shifts. Again, understanding where is the consumption pattern shifting, and how do consumers want to consume their products, and what are some of the trends that are actually going to shape how they consume products in the coming decades. And then principally starting from there, which is why aging shows up there, because, again, it's not rocket science, right? Is that the world is aging, everyone's living longer, and it also turns into a consumer that is significantly underserved, right? So starting principally from where is the consumption going to come from, to start deriving some of the broader areas, and then mobilizing team under each one of those broader areas to say, let's go figure out what's interesting, what is out there, what are entrepreneurs doing, what are some of the new trends that are emerging, what's some of the new science that's emerging, to build really an individualized investment thesis, if you will, down at that category level, and then really mobilize our scouting network to start searching for interesting partners to play in that area. And then once we have those partnerships, then create very small scale, mini, agile, lean experiments to start assessing product market fit, to say, what would it take to convert what you have into an enduring proposition, right? So that's also one minor point, which is important here, is that we are looking for creating big brands and businesses that endure. That's our business model. Versus many of the venture capitalists, again, nothing wrong with it, but their time horizon is a lot shorter than ours. So while we have a little bit more patience, obviously, what we are looking for, and therefore the selection criteria and the bar that we have for the partnerships that we do get into actually is pretty high, right? So because we are looking at, is there a long-term consumer need here? Number one. Number two, can we serve that need better than those who are already playing in that particular category? And then the third one is this a market that we believe is going to grow over time? So again, it turns into a very simple criteria-based discussion where we can mobilize our teams to really find those technologies that do have that magic, that do have that ability to deliver on an actual consumer pain point and a consumer unmet need, which is also something that we spend and obsess over a lot, to then be able to create something that will truly make a difference in the consumers' lives, right? The world is rife with decent answers to problems that nobody needs solved out there. So this is truly, again, bringing our core of consumer insights and consumer understanding to bear, to holistically understand what are the pain points. Do we as P&G want to play a part in solving those pain points? We are obviously an FMCG company, right? A CPG company, and non-CPG solutions are not of interest because it doesn't fit with our business model. To then really start figuring out how we want to play in each one of these categories.
So I love this focus on the customer and customer empathy, and I think we'll dig into the customer, the aging customer in a moment. I would love first though to understand kind of the lens that P&G brings to that. I just love how you're focused on dignity and grace and beauty and self-care and so forth. So help us understand sort of the mindset of P&G as you are digging in and trying to learn more about the customer pain point and solving for that.
Yeah, so I mean, I can specifically talk about the perspective from an aging perspective, right? Again, from the fact that the world is aging and the fact that there's going to be tremendous amount of demand is not rocket science, right? And at the same time, what we have learned is that the innovation ecosystem in the aging space is somewhat counterintuitive. And what I mean by that is that was one of our first ahas as we started looking into this particular category, is that, despite the fact that almost 95+% of consumers are aging at home, predominantly almost all of the dollars from an innovation perspective in the world of aging were going in the B2B space that predominantly served the other 5% or less of consumers who were in institutional care. So as P&G, as a company who's in your home, who understands, who wants to be in your home, that was a little bit of a head scratcher for us to say, why is it that the action is not where the consumer is? and clearly a lot of it is innovation. Clearly a lot of it is, how mature are some of the technologies and what are the types of problems that entrepreneurs are working on. But that to this day still is one of the huge reassurances that I have, which is that there's this huge, massive opportunity that very few people are actually thinking about. And there are, actually, if you think about it, if you take a step back, there are very few, if any, consumer-facing brands that are targeted towards older adults. And actually, there's a hidden paradox in it. Do you actually want to be seen buying a product that is made for an older consumer? Right? So that's where the dignity point that you're trying to make comes into play, because now what we want to do is create products that understand you, that understand your needs, that actually help you thrive in whatever environment that you want to thrive in, with whatever activity that we are talking about, but then do it in a way that doesn't further denormalize the situation. Right. So from that particular perspective, one of our conclusions, specifically in the aging category, was around the fact that we have a design challenge. We have a design. It's not the innovation challenge in the classical sense of innovation. And there's obviously some amazing innovation happening in the medical fields, in the patient coordination and care coordination, et cetera. And all of those are critical and all of those are necessary. But when it comes to consumer in their home, we have a design problem. Because nobody is thinking about it. I mean, I've run businesses at P&G, right, where my media plan magically stops at the age of 55, and because there's very little understanding of that particular consumer. And I've blasted you with my advertising for 40 years. You know who I am. You'll figure it out. I don't need to talk to you, right? Of course, I'm kidding. But from that, it's a societal perspective that has converted this into a consumer that is so significantly underserved and understood, if that's a word, to really, for a company like P&G to then take a fresh eye look at it, to say, what are the problems? What are some of the core motivations? And how can we start creating some unique partnerships in that area, and also become part of the broader ecosystem, right? This is not a winner takes all, because obviously it's a huge category. And how can we help the entrepreneurs, despite the fact that we may or may not have interest in the technology? And that's also some of the work that, honestly, I'm really proud of the work that my team and all of us are doing, which is, mentoring startups and helping them understand what does it take to commercialize a product in many categories, but certainly in this category where it's hard. If you talk to entrepreneurs, I've spoken to entrepreneurs who start B2C, figure out how difficult it is, immediately pivot to B2B, because kind of that's the proven business model, right? And the moment you go down that path, again, all good reasons, and in many instances that is exactly the right thing to do, but also at the same time, in many instances, it shortchanges the consumer at the end of that entire life cycle. Because the moment you go down that life cycle, assuming that the product might also lend itself to a consumer-facing brand or a consumer-facing proposition, you stop designing for the consumer and you start designing for cost optimization, for efficiency, for reimbursement. You get into all of these complex business models that in a very unintentional way, in most instances, starts taking you away from the consumer, starts taking you away from actually solving the problem. And that's where, we again, I continue to see a lot of opportunity and a huge dialogue and narrative, and incredibly excited to see all the people who are on here on this particular call. Thank you for joining, because it is an important dialogue, and this is clearly not something that we are going to do it or solve it any one person or any one company. It's going to take a lot of us pouring our mental energy into and resources into this particular opportunity and a problem.
Well, and I love the focus on the design innovation as much as the product market fit innovation. And I'll add business model innovation, right? So indeed, it could very well be that a startup will launch with a B2C business model and find, again, how difficult it is. And you kind of have to go to selling to the institutional just for the economies of scale. And then, you know, that also then keeps us in that trap, if you will, of creating sort of this monolith understanding of
Yep.
the older consumer. And I see here Nick Thompson is chiming in that Facebook demographics go by 5-year age group, and then you get to 65, and that's it. Then everybody's the same age, right? So a
Yes.
65, and by the way, a 65-year-old today is going to be very different from a 65-year-old a couple of years from now. Given whatever technology adoption, cultural adoption, changing, you know, mindsets about what it means to be old. You know, I was in financial services for decades, and we lived by the mantra that 10,000 people a day are turning 65 and therefore hitting retirement age. Well, guess what? 10,000 people a day are turning 80. Right? Like the boomers are
Yep.
starting to turn 80, right? So what does it mean to design for an 80-year-old who very much still fashions themselves as the hippie that changed the world and, you know, wants to live with joy and independence and vitality and you know, individual expression. So I would love to dig into that. Like, how does a startup, like, given that there's a, you know, 30 to 40 year consumer kind of demographic span that we can target, how does P&G think about slicing that, and how would a startup think about like a good entry point?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I'll try to I'll attempt to answer that particular question. I think the macro response that I have, regardless of who you are serving, is to flip the narrative from deficit to potential.
Yes.
Okay. And I think, again, in the voice that you use, in the brand design, in the proposition design, everything is the entire category is positioned around, you have a deficit, and I'm going to help you with your deficit. Right? So, you poor thing, I'm going to help you with your deficit.
Yes.
The consumer, as you said, the 80-year-old hippie, or a 92-year-old. We have a friend here who we co-designed with. His name is Jack here in town. He's 92 years old, and a couple of years ago he had 2,700 miles on his bike. That is the second highest he has done in his entire lifetime. He downloads his blood sugar readings from his meter every single day to perform statistical analysis. And you go and you sit with him, and your mind is blown to say, oh my God, I want to be you if I'm lucky enough to be alive at 92. Right? So I think that's number one, which is flipping the narrative from deficit to potential.
Okay.
So one. Number two, I think when you get down to your actual proposition, making sure that you are solving a problem that truly matters. And the solution that you have in our language is truly a painkiller and not a vitamin.
Okay.
Right? The world is rife with vitamins where you take it and then you hope and pray that it's working and it's doing what it's supposed to do, versus something that has, and that means that you need to dive deeper into the customer's life to truly understand what is the pain point, in what context is it manifested, and what does a painkiller in that particular context mean, and then does my product or does my technology deliver on it, or how do I need to design my product to actually be able to deliver on that. So I'll give you an example of kind of the logical chain that you can start at a very macro level, but then arrive at a very specific problem, which is one of the problems that we are working on. So going back to what I had started off with, 95% of consumers are aging at home, right? That's obviously where they want to age, and that's obviously where they want to grow older. And their number one motivation, therefore, home as long as I can. So logically you ask, well, what's preventing you from doing that, right? And then you do your research and you do your analysis and assessment, and you get a whole host of issues that are, acute medical issues, to something that is called falls, right? Which is very high up. So again, this is not rocket science, right? What I'm saying here is, all of you are nodding to say, yeah, of course, there's nothing new there. But falls are a huge reason why someone needs to be hospitalized or institutionalized, and that, as we know, starts a downward spiral.
Indeed.
So now we know that in order to deliver on your inherent motivation to stay at home, maybe if I can help prevent falls, that could be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't stop there and double click on falls, where do falls occur? Where they occur all over the place, but in your home, where do they occur? It turns out that a quarter of the falls occur in the bathroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the falls in the bathroom are 2.5 times as more dangerous than falls anywhere else in the house. Then you ask the next question to say, where in the bathrooms do falls occur?
Right.
It turns out that falls, a lot of the falls occur in the shower or in the bathtub.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you don't stop there to say, during what activities do those falls occur while you're taking the shower? And it turns out that it's not while entering the shower or exiting the shower, it's actually during the process of taking the shower, where, with steam and soap and water and a little bit compromised stability, it's when you twist and you turn to pick up the soap and change the water temperature, it's those sudden movements.
And I think dexterity, right? Dexterity and your just overall cognition.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
you see what I'm saying is that just by following a very simple chain of logic, you can arrive at this huge area of de-risk showering, right? And of course, there's a big industry there. We have bars, kind of the handlebars and non-slip mats, and a lot of really interesting things that are working in that. What else could we be doing? What else can a company like P&G could be doing in that space? Again, and we have similar such logic strands that truly dive deeper. We spend a lot of time, hours upon hours, with the consumer, understanding the context, because the solution needs to come to life in that context to truly help the consumer. So I would, going back to your original question in terms of what would you tell the startups is again, this is understand the context and don't stop at the most obvious answer, because otherwise you'll end up creating a handlebar with a different color or a handlebar with a sensor embedded in it.
Right. Okay.
But which is helpful, again, not that it's not helpful, but you might be shortchanging yourself in being able to truly solve the consumer's problem.
Indeed. And what I love about that, getting us deeper and deeper into the bathroom experience. I mean, bathrooms, especially now, again, modern cultural, HGTV is, bathrooms, these places of luxury and self-care and spa and, joy and comfort and so forth. But if you suddenly walk into your own bathroom and now it's got all these kind of medical looking bars or something that says, you're now old, it just like there's something from a behavioral science standpoint, right?
Absolutely.
That the person might say, well, you know what, maybe I won't shower as often, or maybe I'm going to try to avoid using the toilet. I mean, we're going to start getting into some vulnerable parts of aging here, but that's really what we're here to solve. As you say, the pain points, not the vitamins. I love that phrase. Because another place of falls is toileting. Is the answer a taller toilet? Is it faster snaps on your button on your pants so you don't, is it, like at what point from the onset of needing to use the bathroom to using the bathroom to exiting that, does it still create that sense of agency? Right?
Yes. Yeah. So no, I think well said. That's exactly it. And understanding the consumer journey and understanding their pain points and building your proposition around that then helps you bring another constituency into the mix, going back to the design problem, which is that of the caregiver,
right?
And the caregiving ecosystem, right? Is the proposition that I'm designing, does it enable self-use? Because there's again a huge connection with dignity and self-confidence that comes from being able to not only buy the product that you want, but use it by yourself, right? Things that you and I take for granted. But then at the same time, does your design enable co-use?
Yes.
Which if you think about it in the context of bathroom is such an incredibly awkward experience when somebody is helping you take a shower, right? If you think about it. Water splashing and all of the craziness within the bathroom, compounded by this guilt, compounded by the awkwardness of the entire situation, is not normal.
Well,
right? How
people,
can design
yeah.
help in that perspective?
Yeah, and people often ask at agency, they say, well, when you say aging, what do you mean by aging? When are you aging? You know, it's fascinating because it's not necessarily a number, right?
It's
And
not.
right, it's more of a mindset. It's also, you know, I think anyway, the point at which, you know, your functional abilities start to really, you know, take away from the things that you love to do. And we all tend to adapt along the way. And at what point are you like actually having to give up doing something because, you know, and so if there's a product that could restore your functional ability and to do so in a way with grace, you know, I think that's the winning combination. And I think now is a wonderful time to talk about the design of the trio. I don't know if any, you know, that's right. Like that story makes me cry every time I see it because it's, you know, about a loving son shaving his father. And there's so much brilliance in the design of that razor. So could you give us a little background on that design and how you got there?
I think it was, again, you know, the team that actually ended up working on it, you know, clearly did an amazing job, both from a proposition perspective as well as from how to talk about it perspective, to just humanize the whole problem.
Mm-hmm.
And the insight, again, around the fact that you're used to shaving like this, and now there's nothing out there that helps you shave like this, you know, which is somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So this is in short, and again, I'm grossly underrepresenting the amazing amount of work that the team did. But fundamentally, it is changing the orientation,
Yeah.
and the design, and then how you talk about it, right?
Yes.
I think that's, again, it is important. And going back to what you were saying in terms of how the spectrum of the consumer journey, and where we think we have the right to play in, is we think about it as a spectrum. You know, at one end, from a physical and cognitive perspective, you are completely independent, and then
Mm-hmm.
at the other end, on one or both fronts, you are completely dependent, right? And
Yeah.
when it comes to consumer facing brands, consumer facing propositions, where they have a choice, there is this huge area in between where you have a niggle, you have a little bit of an issue, or you have a little bit of something that is making you uncomfortable. And it's during those times where it is still not completely at the other end of the spectrum. How
Mm-hmm.
do I open your mind to a new way of thinking about it?
Yeah.
And that's where, if you can design the product right, if you can get the proposition right, if you ensure that it does not denormalize the situation. I know I'm using the same word, but I think it's incredibly important in terms of how you talk about your product and your proposition. I think that's where true magic can happen. Because that's where
Yeah.
that's where there's just so many pain points within the context of your own home that
Yeah.
really nobody's thinking about.
Well, and I love that phrase, like magic happens, right? And usually magic happens also at the intersection of combining different, you know, different technologies or different products, and sort of the intersectionality, like back to the trio, like indeed it's the orientation of the razor and the physical design. And then I thought the beautiful insight too is that the shaving liquid is embedded in the handle to
That's correct.
avoid, right? So the caregiver doesn't necessarily have
Mm-hmm.
to bring their person to a sink, which involves the water splashing, which involves uncomfortable, you know, with the
Yeah.
body and positioning and so forth. So, and I think, again, that's where P&G as this global brand with amazing resources can come into play, because nobody's better on the planet than P&G on the technology of the liquid that belongs inside that, right? That could foam
Yeah.
and do all the right
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. And
So,
also the
so
blade, for example, right? How can you orient the blade in a way that actually minimizes, you know, that you might get, which obviously, you know, for as the skin gets older, you know, you get into all other types of issues from a healing, etc. perspective in case of cuts or wounds. So
great.
yeah,
So
it
yeah, so
does go back to designing that holistic proposition.
right, and see, I love it too. So let's jump off there, because you know, we talked about de-risking showering, we talked about, you know, some personal hygiene and so forth. So yeah, managing skin health and hydration, and then hydration and the interplay with continence. So help us, you know, understand some. Let's dig into some of the other particular pain point areas that P&G is excited to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned some of them, right? Hydration and incontinence, and all of those are, hydration and incontinence are the two ends of the trade-off, right? Hydration
Mm,
at the expense of increased urination is a painful trade-off,
mm,
right? And again, how do you understand that, and how do you help along both fronts to then help resolve that trade-off? It again
mhm.
turns into this big challenge that we have teams who are actually thinking about a lot. Um, you also, directly coming out of the area of fall prevention, you then have the area of mobility and activity, right?
Yeah.
Being able to uh, mobility linked with stability is an incredibly important area in this
Mm,
space. And
mhm,
that's where what we are finding is that traditional industries or traditional places that you would go to look for startups in this particular area uh, might limit where and how broadly you can think. So, for example, one of the things that we are finding in the world of mobility is this entire area of sports and athletes whose
mm,
entire focus is on the
mhm,
types of things that would actually help you with stability, muscle
mhm,
strength, muscle recovery,
mhm,
all of those things where some really interesting technologies are emerging, but all of them are targeted towards athletes.
mm. And
And
increasing
and when you go at
performance.
that
Yeah,
intersection, and when you go and talk to
yeah,
the startup, when you have this aha to say, why can't you take this technology? And of course you'll have to change it, of course you'll have to have the right design changes and make sure that it's fit for use, but can it be used for in an in-home context, and what are the
mhm.
possibilities that can emerge as a consequence, right?
Love
So
it.
now suddenly you've gone from being in this aging ecosystem
Mhm,
to going outside of it to say maybe there are some interesting solutions that are outside of the discipline. It's just that
mm,
either they don't know, either they are not interested, or either they've never been approached. Because yeah, of course they know probably that their muscle strengthening thing can be employed at home for older adults, but who do I partner with? Who can help
right,
me bring this to life?
right,
Do I
right.
partner with hospitals? Do I partner with insurance companies? Do I partner with
Mhm,
again? And that's where I think, given the preponderance of the B2B business model in this particular space, there are so many innovations that never get fully leveraged in the context of what they can truly unleash, right? for for
mm,
for for audiences more than what they are originally intended for. Athletes, yes, it's a growing market, it's a
mhm,
big market, but you put that market and it's not a choice, right? And
right.
add this entire older adult market, and as a startup now you suddenly have access to such a much bigger market, right, category
Mm.
that's available to you. So I think it's again opening, our minds have been open, and as we look around and as we talk to startups, their minds are opening as well, which is really good to see.
So let's dig into that a little bit too around as we know, there's the largest transfer of wealth in human history is going to happen from the well, current older generation to the next generation, and yet a lot of startups encounter I would say somewhat of a roadblock in that whatever products and services designing, maybe Medicare might be the big payer, right? And so we have one of our listeners. Yeah, Catherine, she's saying, the consumer kind of loses their say in this industry if it's all driving towards, Medicare, what
Absolutely.
Medicare would reimburse, let's say, right?
Yep.
And again,
Yep.
startups want to change the world, yes, and you need that financial upside potential. So, what's the purchasing power that you're seeing? You talked about consumer trends at the top of the show here. So yes, there's like desirability trends. What do they want? What are they willing to pay for?
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that's really, the what you're talking about, what you're poking at is really what we call as the value proposition, right? Which is at the
Mhm.
heart of your proposition design and your business model, is how are you going to design and articulate your value proposition
Mhm.
that again, from a company that makes things that are not $400, $500, $600, $800, right? Versus, everyday use items. Obviously there's a price point that we are acutely aware of where we can succeed. And that's something that we are in every instance as we build our proposition, making sure that we are understanding, what truly is the value that this particular proposition can bring to somebody's life. And then think about it holistically, and then obviously make sure that it is priced the right way.
So then I see, we see a lot of startups at agency say, well, how do you then add more value, let's say, to a product? And a lot of ways in which value is added is by, with IoT and apps that provide more traceability, trackability, usage, and then maybe some dashboard functionality. And then, maybe that dashboard functionality could be, driven by a larger, let's say, a senior living operator can then look at. So like, it's, how do you, where's P&G interests end, if you will? Is it just strictly consumer, just packaged goods? When you talk about technology, are you interested in some of the digital components that could then add more value to a product?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think, again, working outside of existing categories and trying to create new go-to-market capabilities and new ways of thinking about categories where we don't already have an entrenched way to talk about the product and go to market gives you the freedom to stretch the boundaries. And one of the biggest freedoms that we've had is this idea that is referenced as kind of jobs to be done, right? Understanding what is that full job or the task that consumer needs to get done, and what's the role of product? Because the moment you ask that, and the moment you focus on and give yourself the permission to solve the entire problem, maybe there's a digital component to it that gives you knowledge in terms of how good your product is working or whether it's not working, that again gets you to adopt the product the right way. Maybe there's a services component to it that is necessary to then complete the whole loop. And we again, these are not easy discussions to have, but at least we are pushing the boundaries and asking ourselves that question, is that if we are truly in the business of solving a pain point or pain points for the consumer, what does it take? And in almost all instances, it does go beyond just a product that sits on a Walmart or a Target or a Walgreens or a Costco or an Amazon shelf, right? So I think we are pushing data, for example, is a great thing. Data as consumable. It's clearly, it's not a foreign idea, but then how do you deploy that in the context of a CPG product? But again, we are completely open to new and different ways of thinking about this. And that's why it's really all about understanding the consumer pain and then holistically solving it. And then if it takes a partner, because we don't have to be in that business. For example, if there's a services component and for whatever reason, we don't want to get into that business, can we find a partner who can help us close the loop for the consumer?
So I love this. So how, startups are now thinking, okay, do I lean in on the prevention side of it, right? So we're talking about like pain points, and I love how you're saying, like, don't only look at deficit, look at potential. At agency, we say, don't just solve for problems, solve for possibilities. So, but is it really hard to convince a consumer that they ought to do more preventative, stuff, or like, it seems more obvious to have an intervention or innovation, after something's broken, or to fix something that looks like, we have a lot of companies that are doing like sensors after somebody falls, for instance, all important, absolutely could be life-saving. How do we shift the consumer mindset and again, their purchasing, desire for the prevention side?
Yeah, no, I think it's incredibly, you hit the nail on the head. It is incredibly important, even for us, right? I mean, by that token, all the gyms in the world should be chock block full of people at all points in time, right? If the preventative message by itself worked, So I think that's exactly it. And even, to your point of even some of the obvious things that you could be doing from a fall prevention perspective, the consumer only becomes receptive after they've actually had a fall and suffered through the consequence, right? So where already now your ability has already been diminished, right? Because your kind of you might heal, but your new normal is going to be lower than what your normal was, before the fall. I don't have the answer, honestly, to that question, but that's something that you have to, the way in which we think about this is we have to design the product for what we call as our torture test consumer, right? It's
your torture test?
Torture test consumer. And by that, what I mean is the consumer for whom the pain is the most acute.
Got it. Oh,
for example, so for example, in the context of fall, right? Clearly people who have suffered multiple falls, they are, from a receptivity perspective, most acutely receptive to new and interesting ideas.
Got it. Yes.
That is my inspiration from a design perspective.
Okay.
However, that's only my inspiration, because I need to make sure that the product works in their context. And if I can make it work in their context, then the challenge is on design. The challenge is on communication. The challenge is on how I actually talk about my product to try and bring it towards the center. I'm never going to be able to convince a 45-year-old to adopt a solution that is like, why? I don't need this. Look at me, I'm fine. I don't need it. And that, by the way, that never stops, right?
Yeah. Well, again,
look, I'm just 80, I don't need this
yeah,
product. So I think it is a messaging challenge. It is a design challenge again. But we do have to figure out for whom are you designing, and making sure that people who actually have the most acute manifestation of that particular problem, your solution actually works in that particular context, because now you've delighted that particular consumer who has the most acute pain point. And then you need to start dialing it towards broader and broader consumer set, right? And I mean, classic example is Nike, right? I mean, their inspirational consumer is an athlete, not a blob like me who goes to gym twice a month. However, designing for the athlete, creating that aspiration, and then broadening it to somebody like me or a layperson, to say, you know what, this will actually help me. So let me. So again, a lot of this is in thinking it through and messaging as well.
Messaging, and I think too, and we talk about this at agency all the time, like who actually is the customer, right? Yes. So indeed, right, the person who's going to use the product may be the older adult in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and they want to make a buying decision based on, does this bring me joy? Does it make me feel independent, and so forth? But it might be that it's their adult child who's actually the person who's going out and buying it, or maybe they're the one Googling it and figuring it out and they might be making a purchasing decision based on, does this lower my stress, my anxiety, my guilt? Is it can mom afford it? If I keep buying it, like, is she, is this worth it? And then, if it's a certain price point, maybe the insurance company is the customer, or maybe the healthcare provider, who is recommending this becomes, and so they have different purchasing criteria. So I would love to dig into that a little bit, but also look at it globally. We have a number of comments coming in through the chat about how, given that P&G's global perspective, how do you design something for an American consumer versus an Asian consumer in Japan versus a consumer in Africa, Latin America? Like, how do you think about this, and where do you draw that inspiration?
Yeah. So two things
for that target customer. Yeah.
First, I think you're exactly right. There are two buyers, if you will, right? The consumer himself or herself, and then their caregiver, right? And I think the messaging can be very different, and it has to be more than me as a son doing my duty to buy something or convince my mom to buy something to reduce my guilt. Is one way. That's probably not the most optimum way, but how can I create then something that actually an adult son or an adult daughter can themselves use and benefit from, which then turns the conviction part grows, and then convincing, you know, their parents actually becomes easier. So, but again, it's not trivial by any means, because you have two very different consumers that you need to think through from a messaging perspective, and also from a design perspective. In terms of the global aspect of it, of course, we have global ambitions, right? We are a global company. The best part about working in a very small part of a huge global organization is I can afford to fail. I can afford to fail cheaply. I need to prove myself into a geography where the startup might be based out of, or where, you know, the solution is most, the pain is more acutely felt. And I can experiment my way to building a proposition that at least gives me a chance to then think about. I think of it as a good problem to have, right? I have something that works in the US. How do I make it work in China? It's not the same. It's not the same solution. It needs to be customized. It needs to be tailored. And what we do is, in our upfront thinking, we do try to be as global as possible to try and understand the pain point and what are some of the cultural manifestations of that pain point, and how are they different in some of the bigger geographies, right? Where we can see ourselves, or we need to be in those marketplaces at a minimum in order to create large scale businesses. So it is absolutely a part of the upfront thinking to then be able to derive the investment thesis, if you will. And then once we know that that area is attractive, then I can't afford to put too much of a global ambition too early in the life cycle, right? Then I'm almost in a startup mode. I'm in the product market fit mode, where I'm experimenting with the consumer, small scale experiments in a given geography to prove out the proposition, to learn from it, to fine tune and hone my product design. And then again, it would be a great problem for us to have, to say, this works. How do we take it somewhere else?
Got it. And so let's go back to the beginning of the conversation, which is, so for the innovators listening today and those who will watch this recording, if they've got an idea that you know, they've got some proof points that it's working in a particular context, is that when they come to you and say, okay, I want to partner and collaborate to take it global? Because, you know, it's hard, you know, from a resource standpoint to understand all those different markets. Would that be an appropriate ask of P&G? Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So again, we partner with companies that are, you know, just simple idea at a pre-seed level, all the way to startups that actually have a product that they're working on that needs that additional boost from an access perspective, from expanding the market perspective, and also proposition design perspective, right? Manufacturing and scale, all the hard part about scaling is something that we as a company know how to do, right? I mean, this early partnerships actually help bring an infusion of new and interesting ideas, and we are absolutely open to ideas across the spectrum. And of course, we start the conversations by sharing non-confidential information and just understanding. There are some aspects where it's very easy for us to say no to, just because of our company and what we'll do. You know, for example, aging and financial security is a huge unmet need in an area, but that's not a company that's not an area rather that P&G is going to play in, right? So some of those areas and guardrails are very clear, but then within those guardrails, it's let's talk, let's have a conversation, let's understand how can we help you. And as I said, in many instances, there are so many companies that we actually continue talking with, despite the fact that we are not in any form of partnership with them, because we believe in what they're doing, and because we believe that we can, as a mentor, from a mentoring or from a relationship perspective, we continue to support many of those companies individually, you know, not monetarily, but individually, from a connecting the companies to, you know, other experts and capabilities that we know of. So again, the help. And what I have been most amazed with in this world of ventures that I've been dabbling into for the last 3 years is the incredible generosity of people that I've encountered.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah.
look, we don't have a business in this area, right? We don't
Mm-hmm.
know, in many instances, we don't know what we are doing. And we are writing the playbook as we go along. And it has been amazing, all the conversations that my team has had, I have had to learn. And therefore, the least that we can do is really give back and have that conversation back to see, to give whatever we can from an intellectual capital perspective.
Well, I love that sentiment, especially because, we are they, we're talking about the older consumer now, but gosh, like every one of us, if we were to be so lucky, could be a customer of our own innovation at some point. And so indeed, to have a corporate partner like P&G along that journey as a thought partner, as well as an actual collaborator and potential financial partner as well. I mean, it's just, as we say, like there's millions and millions and millions and millions of potential customers in this area, and then adding their family members and adding their care partners, it just becomes a very rich and worthwhile place, to innovate. And so before we wrap up, I just want to encourage any innovators who are listening, if you do have an idea and you do wish to start a conversation with agency and P&G, I encourage you to go to the agency website, cic.com/agency. We'll put that link in the chat, as well as pgventurestudio.com, which is Chetan's front door. And their intake forms on the PG Venture Studio, and you can see all the categories that P&G is looking at, including aging at home. And if you go through that process, fill out that information, and they'll take a meeting. So I encourage you to reach out, and Chetan, I'm very just so grateful for is your willingness to teach us kind of what you're seeing and what you're learning, and to be vulnerable from a corporate standpoint to say there's so much we don't know. And indeed, many startups who come to this work, at least what we have seen at agency, come to this work from a very profound lived experience in their own life, whether it's caring for a loved one, or they themselves retire, or they themselves fell in the shower, and they're like, there's got to be a better way, and go about it, from a place of extreme empathy, right? And so to then blend that deep empathy with the corporate resources that P&G brings to the table, I just think is such a powerful combination. And so, I would love if there's any parting words you would like to share with our listeners today. We have about a minute left, and I just want to thank everybody for joining us. So Chetan, any thoughts that come to mind that you want to make sure that we just ruminate on?
No, the only thought that comes to mind is thank you. I think, this is, again, an important dialogue. No, it is an important dialogue, and it is, the solutions aren't obvious, and we've had lots of stumbles and lots of, places that we thought were interesting, but turned out not to be for various reasons. So I think it's important to continue this dialogue and this discussion. And I thank you again for taking the time to listen in to this conversation. And hopefully this is not the end of our conversation.
Well, I'm glad you teed that up, because indeed we want to take this show on the road, and Chetan and I want to, and we'd love to hear from the listeners, is to continue rolling with this conversation and digging into some of the particular areas that we covered today, and go in even more depth, whether it's a business model innovation or the science, all the new advances and research that can spark an amazing next generation product, our deeper understanding of the range of consumers 55 plus, and the contexts, and their family context, their living context, their global communities that they're part of. I mean, each one of these could be even more rich conversations. And I do see some folks that are asking, like, okay, but does P&G take a cut? Do they take royalties? What's the actual business model? And these are all important conversations. Yeah. So listeners, I encourage you to, again, apply to collaborate with P&G. Each one of the relationships between P&G and a startup will differ, right?
Yes.
Based on the
Yes.
circumstances.
Yes.
So there's really
Yeah.
no one size
Totally.
fits all.
And the only thing I
Yeah.
would say is that actually, if you do go on our website, pgvventurestudio.com, again, there are a couple of case studies with actual products that we have in the marketplace where, you know, there are interviews from the actual startup founders that we are partnering with, which will hopefully give you a little bit of a glimpse of how we partner. And no, it's not as simple as just taking a cut. Right? It's truly bringing our complement, what we believe would be the complementary capabilities to bear in that particular relationship or partnership to ensure that that proposition can then succeed.
Yes. And I want to just put an exclamation point on that, because the more that these products get out into the market, and to do so with the core values that you've talked about that we share at agency, like design for joy, not for stigma, I think we could start to crack at a real social problem, and a lot of listeners are chiming in about this, and that is ageism, right? Is to say that at some point as we grow up, suddenly ageism starts to be kind of a headwind, and so I think that more that we chip away at this, and that will hopefully start to flip that narrative that we could just live our best lives. And with brand partners like P&G, it could be a beautiful journey. So with that, I would love to say thank you to Chetan. Thank you so much, and
Thank you.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you to the whole P&G Venture Studio team that supports your work. Thank you to the Venture Cafe team that supports the platform that we get to share this, and thank you to agency and Captains of Innovation, and all the folks that are working really hard to innovate for living longer and aging better. So come find us on cic.com/agency, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you all.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chetan. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We have another session coming up at 5. It is on patent strategy, and our networking room is still open. If you would like to go and network and continue this conversation, please feel free to. It's a wonderful opportunity to build a community. And with this, thank you very much for being here today.